Hello everyone, this is ManyNinjas. We're doing part 2 of my unknown number kind of part series of the various things I have in my game collection as of this point, give or take, in late June of 2015. I say as of this point because quite frankly I'm always kind of picking up stuff randomly or have stuff given to me. Like for instance the fact that just prior to this recording, after I finished work today, I was actually just handed a random copy of Nintendo Land for the Wii U that the old man just happened to come across. So for this particular edition, we're actually going to be covering a bit of the box games I have, or really, let's start actually with the original system that I went to when I actually really started collecting things seriously, so to speak, and that's going to be the Nintendo Entertainment System. For the most part, we're going to be talking about the North American releases I have, since I do have some Famicom cards, but most of them, well, if I talk about this, will be at the end of the video. Most of them generally are either multi-cards or just a handful of other things. It's a pretty small Famicom card collection at this point, but we'll talk about that later, if anything. Starting off, we're actually going to have the box games I have for the Nintendo system. I apologize for the fact these are not exactly in alphabetical order. As I said before, everything that is on this shelf format, which I'm now panning upward to. As you can see, I have a lot of things going on here, and I'm constantly trying to figure out new ways to sort out all the content I have on here, so it's a bit of a rough one. So, starting off, first off, we have RoboCop 2 for the NES. The box itself is pretty beat up, but actually no, I probably overpaid for this one considering this game. This game is not very good, ladies and gentlemen. It's just something I happened to come across of it. I was originally planning on doing a bit of a review of the general RoboCop series of games, but quite frankly, I forgot how bad some of them really were. Gyromite. This is basically a Canadian version of the game, as you can probably tell by the English and French here. At some point, it was $9.99. I think I got this one in the thrift store, and I didn't pay that much. Probably like $2-3 tops, box or not. The box here is pretty beat up, but this is a copy of Star Tropics here. It still has the, I believe, 2 copies of the original letter on there that haven't actually been marked by water. At least one of them hasn't. The boxes have incredibly beat up, but it's actually entertaining to see if you can pan up a little closer. It still has the old Zeller's sticker on there. At one point, this was retail $69.96. Alright. This is actually a really clean copy of Dr. Mario that I picked up at some point. I imagine this is actually another thrift store find. Oh, as a side note, I should probably mention this here. The plastic cases you see around here that I'm using for a lot of these boxes came from, I believe, Ninja Protector or something like that. I'll have to add in a note later. But basically, it's something that I know a couple of game stores around here had been using, and generally they sell a lot of stuff on there. Natsume's Shadow of the Ninja. I probably mentioned this once or twice. I do like my ninja games. This is a box copy of it. Honestly, I'm actually missing the manual for this one, and I paid a bit more for this title than I normally care for, but the game itself is pretty fun. Wrath of the Black Manta. I originally owned the loose cart version of this. I think I still have a loose duplicate hanging around, but I came across, I believe this was at Toy Rat shop over in Milton, Ontario. This was a fairly affordable one, so why the hell not? The game itself is actually pretty decent on there. Imagine that, and then the Ninja game. Ninja Gaiden in this case. It's really hard to say anything that needs to be said here. Most things have been said. I think I also came across this in a thrift store not too far from here, back when it was still honestly easier to find things like that around here. But most of my stuff, especially from the Super Nintendo collection, which we'll discuss at a later time, actually came from there when it comes to these box games, where I just randomly found a bunch of them all at once for cheap. Crash and the Boys Street Challenge. Unfortunately, this was not a thrift store find, but the price was right, so why the hell not? Any Kunio-kun games tend to be pretty decent. RoboCop. This is actually the original NES one that I really wanted to play. This is probably the best of the NES games, to have to be quite frank. So definitely good to have there. The box itself is in pretty decent shape. So I think, well, except for this back label here, but hey, can't win them all. At least on the bright side, I didn't pay too much for that, so all's fair there. One second, kind of panning down there. This is basically a really clean copy of Metal Gear for the original one. Of course, we all know Metal Gear is a Konami game, but as you can probably see by the label there, Ultra Games. the companies at the time, because of Nintendo's policies of how many games a year could be released by a single company, Ultra Games is basically one of those. I'm trying to remember what the proper term is, but basically like a cover company or something, or basically the company under a different name, just so they could get around Nintendo's kind of strict release policies. Tetris 2. The only reason I have this is because it was found for cheap. I'm going to be honest. And a copy of Pinball. One of the original Black Series games. I don't remember where I got this one actually. But at least it's in pretty decent shape. A little beat up around the top here, but hey, what can you do? Alright. Moving on from there. That covers the boxed NES games. So we're going to start opening and looking through the kind of shoebox format, my IKEA boxes here of various cards. And also that reminds me, I do have some stuff back here I do need to sort. So after a pause, we'll start with the first box and start working our way out. Alright, now we've panned over to a quick setup of what I aptly name NES boxes 1 and 2. This was back when I was still somewhat earlier on and could organize these things a little better. But as you can probably guess by the fact that the alphabetical order sort of starts getting abandoned at some point, it starts going out of hand pretty quickly. Starting off from the top of the list of box number 1 at least, we have Airwolf. Pretty much, as kind of guess there, based off the hit TV series. I picked up this game, haven't got around the chance to play it. The next one, I'll highlight there, just naming this one specific because Cyber Stadium Series Base Wars was actually one of those games that I had, well, I should really say both Carlos and I had in our youth. Played quite a bit of it, so I really had to pick up another copy. The original NES Batman, considered one of the, for the longest time, one of the best Batman games, period. And best comic book games, really, if you want to think about it there. I'd still say it belongs there. Bionic Commando, Blades of Steel, just for shits and giggles there. This copy of Bubble Bobble, I believe, was actually gifted that by Beatrice at some point. Which probably could say, for a decent number of items in some of these boxes, like I think Castlevania, the Castlevania set here also applies that. A lot of these games for the NES collection were a combination of things that I happened to buy relatively cheap for the most part whenever I could help it. Back when it was still somewhat cheaper for NES collection, collecting in general. Stuff I've been gifted, either from the family or friends, and just generally weird stuff that I came across when I saw it and it's like I had to have it. So, blah 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 1. I'm still looking for part 2 right now, although unfortunately I know that's a bit on the expensive end. The main 3 Castlevania games on the NES, Castlevania, Simon's Quest, and Dracula's Curse. Definitely fun times, very enjoyable games there. Double Dragons 1 through 3. Number 2, The Revenge, is the one that I happen to really play the most out of in my youth. And this particular copy is a bit of amusing and annoying because it was this copy I picked it up from a flea market originally. One that was like in the, I would say in the Dundas area, for those more familiar in the, well, it was like a flea market. There's like a Dr. Fleas or something like that. Or something that was around the Honeybee Mall, I think, in the Mississauga area, for those that are more familiar with the general region I talking about in the GTA. But this copy was so grimy in terms of the pins, this was really before I learned how to properly clean the stuff, that it actually completely messed up the NES system I had at the time. And it took some work in order to get it back up and running. Double Dribble. I don't remember when this was picked up. I don't recall it being a particularly good game, but it's here. The Dragon Power. For those not familiar with this particular title, it's basically just a reskinned Dragon Ball game. Fist of the North Star. It is a Fist of the North Star game. Not a particularly good one, if I'm going to be quite honest, but anything where you can punch things and they explode is A-okay in my book. Moving on to box number 2, the original DuckTales game. You can't go wrong with this one, it's a great title. The remastered version is also really good, for that matter, but you have to have the original. Speaking of originals, the original Final Fantasy title. Once again, really nice one. I still want to say it holds the test of time there, although it does probably feel a bit on the slow side compared to some of the more action RPG games I tend to play, basically second Densetsu games. But still, you can't go wrong with it. From the Black Box series of games, you have Golf, Hogan's Alley, Basically, horizontally being a shooter, or something that uses the zapper gun on top of everything else. Off the top of my head, 1 second, actually. Let me double check. I haven't looked at this game for a while. Yeah, it's part of the light gun series of games. I don't exactly keep the old tube TV in this particular room in my office, but I do happen to have one around that I keep specifically for this purpose. Alright, the next 6 games being the original NES Mega Man series. Yeah, you can't go wrong with these. Unfortunately, they're a bit on the pricey side now. I imagine I was actually gifted a handful of these games. I don't remember exactly which ones off the top of my head. But definitely it was nice to be able to pick up the set now, or back then, because now it's quite pricey each one. I think the lowest prices are like $30, $40 for these now, which is actually kind of sad. River City Ransom. I want to say roughly one of the new ones. Would have been a few months back when I got this one. Thankfully the price was still decent enough. Dragon Warrior. This particular copy I have, I think the one I have here is the... not the Canadian version, but I think it's the North American version. Let me double check. Yeah, this is one of the North American builds, or the American builds I should say, because on the Canadian version it would actually have French translation on there as well. So that can tell it's probably a US model. Shooting Range. Actually just picked this up fairly recently from the store I mentioned in the last video, Buy Mine, Sell Yours, as part of a giant stash of things they happen to pick up there. Another shooter or NES Zapper series game. Haven't had the chance to try that yet. I really need to plug in the Tube TV and give it a shot soon. Alright, and in terms of games in the angle, title game Kickmaster. Kind of a weird game. Fun game, but a weird one at that. I think I was actually originally recommended this by someone I know from a different video game forum. If you happen to be watching the Sealers, hey, how's it going? Street Fighter 2010, The Final Fight. It basically just had the Street Fighter name kind of tossed in there because they wanted to hopefully get it to sell a few things. This copy's a little on the beat up side, but I picked it up for $10, so you can't go wrong. Alright, I'm going to include these two which are outside of the box but already available in hand. Gyrus, once again under the Ultra Games banner, aka it's Konami game. Your basic shoot 'em up, can't go wrong. And something I picked up fairly recently, Ghostbusters 2. They also had Ghostbusters 1 for sale, but Ghostbusters 1 sucks, so we don't talk about it. Alright, one more or another quick pan, and we're going to go to boxes 3 and 4. Alright, moving on to the 3rd and 4th boxes. As you can see, no less stuff than the previous two. Starting off from the top, we have Ninja Gaiden 2 and 3 to round out the whole NES trilogy for that series. Operation Wolf here. Last one of that series I played was actually Operation Thunderbolt. That was actually played off the arcade machine at not last year's Con Bravo, but the one before it. Fun times. Here's Punch-Out. Unfortunately, not Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. This one was kind of picked up for cheap at the time, and right now the price for Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is a bit on the pricier side for what it is. I will probably end up plunking down a few dollars in order to pick up later, but that's as the time comes. I'm not in a huge hurry. Alright, next 4 games are part of the Super Mario set. Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt, aka your standard pack-in with a lot of your NES units back then. Super Mario Bros. Just to have a kind of a standalone version of the card. And Super Mario Bros. 2 and Super Mario Bros. 3. Just because you have to have those. The funny part about 3 is, not for this particular version, but back when my brother and I and the family had the original NES set and all the games with that, I think my dad had to go to like 3 or 4 different microplay and other gaming stores to find a copy of the game that would actually run in the system, because the ones that kept coming back or coming in here were we didn't, of course this is before we really learned how to clean the cards properly, but they basically were dirty enough and wouldn't actually run in the systems properly. So it was a bit of a mess. Super Spike V-Ball. This, at least based on the translation and the little change on there, can be considered the Double Dragon game because there is a playable Billy and Jimmy Lee team in this setup. Kind of a weak team, mind you. I wouldn't use it. I'd use the one with Al, and I don't remember the other big guy's name. But generally, it technically does have Double Dragon in it. Go fun. Go figure. Alright. Moving back to Konami, aka Ultra Games, we have the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game, as well as number 2, the arcade game. This one was actually recently picked up from Buy Mine, Sell Yours. This is something you'll hear me say quite a bit. Unfortunately, they actually had a copy of Manhattan Project in there as well, but just as they picked up that copy, someone else who was in the store apparently purchased it at the same time. Much to my annoyance, especially since the price was actually really good for that. If you happen to be hearing this, Silver Barco, I'm coming for you. Alright, Twin Cobra. Wayne Gretzky Hockey. Yeah, generally Twin Cobra. The funny part for that, I kept getting that mixed up with Twin Eagle between everyone in our family here, so as we'll see in the next box, I kind of fixed it because I couldn't remember which was which. The two 10-game games you see here are, one is Shinobi, because I have to have my Ninja games, even though it's honestly not a great port of the game, and Rolling Thunder, just because the price was right at the time. Alright, moving on to the next bit, we have Strider. Quite frankly, interesting take, not different from the arcade game of the same name. Yoshi, because I like my puzzle games. The Adventure of Link. Nice shiny. At this point, it's surprised actually the card still has a decent amount of its luster left. Rather impressive, actually. Twin Eagle. Because I couldn't remember whether it was Twin Cobra or Twin Eagle that I played a lot when I was younger, I got both. And Tiger Heli for good measure. Friday the 13th. This is more of a de-Tysonator game than it is a game that I normally play, but it was for cheap, why not? This game with the incredibly beat-up label is actually a copy of Contra. Why would I get a copy with this beat-up label? Because the game was cheap. Very cheap, so made it affordable. Fortunately, my copies of Super C is much better in shape. And actually picked up a copy of Life Force as well. The card itself is a little on the dingy side, but hey, it runs and it's really nice, so why not? Darkman, I must have found this in a thrift store. Casino Kid, I know I found in a thrift store. Tecmo Super Bowl, I wish I found in a thrift store. It would have been much cheaper than the copy I got here. I didn't pay too much for it, but it still cost a few dollars. WWF WrestleMania. Classic game. Not a good game, but a classic game. I want to have it for my original collection, so I had to have it. You'll probably notice I'm going to mention a few Tetris games in there. I do like my Tetris games. It's kind of like how I like my bust-a-move / puzzle bobble games. So I have a few different iterations lying around. And the last one rounding off this box would be Taito Renegade. Because generally, I like my beat-em-up games, which will become a little more prevalent as we look at other systems, basically like my Genesis and Super Nintendo setup. Alright, well that rounds out everything here for my NES stuff. Probably a good time to cut out because the camera is now telling me this is actually low on battery at this point, so I'm going to stop recording now while I still have the power to do so. Next time we'll go move on to, I believe we're going to go to the Super Nintendo game. And I say Super Nintendo specifically because if we add in the Super Famicom games, it's going to be quite a bit of video. Alright, thank you all for watching. If you happen to have any ideas of any other NES games, by the way, that might be worth looking into, and preferably places where I can find it for reasonable prices, feel free to drop a line. Especially in terms of the price stuff. Unfortunately, NES games are generally really expensive in this area. At this point, unfortunately, everyone kind of picked up on it. So anything that is pretty much a quality title that can be found at a decent price, I actually would be interested in, because I'm still trying to pick up stuff for this system. Alright, I'm out of battery now. So